Rain hammered against the tall windows of St. Augustine Hospital while thunder rolled across the sky, shaking the glass and casting flashes of lightning through the dark corridors. Inside the hospital, the night shift had slowed to a quiet crawl. Most patients were asleep. Machines hummed softly, and the long white hallways were mostly empty except for the faint flicker of fluorescent lights. Marcus Max walked down the corridor with heavy steps, his security boots echoing softly across the polished floor. At 43, Marcus still looked like the fighter he once was. Broad shoulders, muscular arms stretching his uniform, the build of a man who had spent years in boxing rings before life pushed him into night security work. Behind him walked Frank Whitmore, the older guard in his early 50s, thin but tall with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen 2 decades of strange hospital nights. Frank glanced out at the storm raging outside the windows, and muttered that nights like this always made the hospital feel wrong somehow. Marcus didn't answer at first, but just as they reached the elevator leading to the lower levels, a loud metallic clang echoed from below them. Both men froze. Marcus slowly turned toward the elevator shaft and asked Frank if he heard it too. Frank frowned, trying to shrug it off as maintenance noise. But then it came again, louder this time. Metal striking metal somewhere deep below. Marcus pressed the elevator button, and the door slid open with a tired groan, releasing a wave of cold air that made Frank rub his arms. The temperature felt far colder than it should have been. Without hesitation, Marcus stepped inside, and Frank reluctantly followed as the doors closed and the elevator began descending toward the morgue. The quiet humming of the elevator cables filled the small metal box while the floor numbers dropped slowly until the doors opened onto the morgue level. The hallway was darker than usual. Several ceiling lights flickered weakly and the air smelled wrong, thick with something rotten and sour that made Frank cover his nose immediately. Marcus stepped forward carefully and scanned the room with his flashlight. Rows of metal body drawers lined the walls in silent order. He counted them instinctively until he noticed one of the drawers was open. Frank stepped closer beside him and whispered that it shouldn't be open because paperwork showed 6 bodies down there tonight. Marcus leaned closer to look inside and immediately noticed deep scratch marks carved violently into the metal surface. The scratches were long, uneven, and desperate, clearly made from the inside of the drawer. Frank's voice trembled slightly as he said that didn't make any sense. Just then, a faint dragging sound moved behind them across the floor. Both men turned slowly and saw a black body bag lying in the middle of the corridor where nothing had been moments before. Frank whispered nervously that it wasn't there earlier. Suddenly, the bag moved. Both men froze. The zipper slowly began sliding open by itself, and a pale gray hand pushed out of the opening, its fingers twitching stiffly as if waking from a long sleep. Frank breathed out a horrified whisper while the corpse slowly sat upright. Its skin looked dry and cracked, lips pulled back from yellow teeth, cloudy white eyes staring directly at Marcus. The body stood slowly, joints cracking loudly like dry wood snapping. Marcus stepped back in disbelief, but before either man could react, another loud bang exploded through the morgue as one of the metal drawers slammed open. Then another and another. Drawers burst open across the room as bodies slid out onto the cold floor. Some twitched violently, others rolled onto their sides, and one corpse slowly pushed itself upright like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. Frank's breathing grew shaky as he realized what they were seeing. The dead were moving. The corpse in front of Marcus tilted its head and opened its jaw unnaturally wide before a dry whisper escaped its throat, saying it was hungry. Marcus immediately grabbed Frank's arm and shouted for him to run. They sprinted toward the elevator as the dead began moving behind them, their feet dragging across the floor, bones snapping and bodies twisting as they stumbled forward. One corpse suddenly lunged from the side and crashed into Marcus, its teeth snapping inches from his neck. Marcus drove a powerful punch into its face, twisting the head sideways, but the body kept moving as if pain meant nothing. Frank shouted in panic that they didn't feel anything while Marcus slammed the elevator button repeatedly. Behind them, more bodies began walking forward. 10, maybe 15. Their hollow eyes locked onto the living men. The elevator doors finally opened and they rushed inside just as a corpse slammed into the closing doors. The metal crushed its fingers between them, but the severed fingers kept wriggling while the elevator rose toward the hospital floors above. Frank leaned against the wall, shaking badly, while asking what the hell was happening. Marcus said he didn't know, but when the elevator doors opened, the nightmare only got worse. A nurse ran past them, screaming down the hallway. Marcus grabbed her arm and demanded to know what was happening. Her face was pale with terror as she pointed down the corridor and said they were everywhere. Marcus and Frank ran toward the emergency ward and immediately saw the hospital had descended into chaos. Patients were running through the halls, doctors were shouting for help, alarms were blaring, and a corpse was attacking a doctor near the reception desk. Another dead body crawled across the floor, dragging a broken leg behind it while nurses screamed in fear. Frank stared in disbelief and whispered that they had come upstairs. Marcus felt dread sink into his chest because it meant something far worse than the morgue incident. Every dead body in the hospital was waking up. The lights flickered violently before emergency mode lighting filled the corridors. Marcus slowly turned back toward the morgue elevator just as the door slid open again. From the darkness below, dozens of corpses began walking out slowly. Doctors, patients, bodies from surgery rooms, bodies from the ICU, and bodies from the morgue all stumbled forward into the hallway. Frank whispered in disbelief and asked how many people had died in this hospital tonight. Marcus stared at the growing crowd of corpses surrounding them and quietly answered that it was too many. The dead slowly closed in around the living, their hollow eyes staring without emotion. One corpse stepped forward and its mouth barely moved as it whispered a single word telling them to stay. Another voice joined from the darkness, saying the same thing. Then dozens of dead voices whispered together through the hospital halls, repeating the same command again and again. Stay. Stay. The lights suddenly died completely, and the hospital was swallowed by total darkness. In that moment, Marcus realized something far worse than the dead rising. They weren't trying to escape the hospital. They were simply claiming it. And the living trapped inside were now the ones who didn't belong.